Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. What's going on in Ukraine and economic development opportunities there is something that I've been really quite interested in. And I came across a company in Toronto that's actually been working on some opportunities, or at least a company that's come originally from Toronto on mining developments in Ukraine called Black Iron Inc. We're joined tonight by Matt Simpson. Matt Simpson is the Chief Executive Officer of Black Iron Inc. He's got a long history, which we'll talk about a little bit later, in Rio Tinto and Brazilian Potash and Hatch, et cetera. He's got an MBA from Queens, and he's got a BA in chemical engineering from Queens. So he knows a little bit about Canada. He knows something about mining, and now he's trying to invest in a mine in Ukraine. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about your company, Black Iron, and what you're trying to do, if you could.
Yeah, so Black Iron is a development stage iron ore project located in central Ukraine. And the goal is to build a high purity, it'll actually be in the top 4% of purity iron ore mine that will supply production of green steel.
And what you say you're a development stage. So what you're on the TSX venture, I understand?
Correct. We are main board TSX. We've raised about 90 million US to bring the project to a near construction ready state. And prior to the full-scale war breaking out, we had raised the bulk of the money, about 500 million US, to construct the project. But unfortunately, with the war, everything is now on hold.
500 million. You've raised a lot of money.
Yeah, we've raised money from some pretty high-quality investors, including the likes of Cargill, the biggest private company in the United States, but the third biggest in the world.
And where's that cash today?
So to be clear, we raised the 90 million to develop the project. The 500 million to construct it was never drawn. So that money still resides with the original investors. And
so are you hopeful that you'll be able to relaunch?
Yeah, once there's peace in the country, the goal is to have this be one of the very first projects that's constructed. I think it's going to be critical for Ukraine to have some concrete examples of successful foreign investment so they can attract other investors to the country, because the history hasn't been the best.
I understand you've recently been a major sponsor of a conference in Toronto called the Rebuild Ukraine Business Conference. Tell me about that conference, if you could, sir.
Yeah, so this is actually the second annual conference that's been held in Toronto. It's attended by people globally. There was roughly 100 people that actually made their way from Ukraine to the event, and that's not an easy task. But there's also the likes of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. You had the International Finance Corporation, private investors, private companies. So we did sponsor that event. And the reason why is we want to keep the profile of Black Iron quite high, because rebuilding of Ukraine is going to require a tremendous amount of steel. And what better than having it produced domestically in a much more environmentally friendly manner?
You've been with Rio Tinto previously, and also with other companies. What attracted you to mining in Ukraine?
You know, Brian, iron ore is a very common metal. The challenge to make it economical is you need to be able to move large volumes at low cost. So proximity to rail, port, power, and skilled labor is really what makes or breaks the economics of a project. What makes Black Iron's project interesting is surrounded by 7 operating iron ore mines within 40 kilometers. And there's 2 of them literally adjacent to the project. One's owned by ArcelorMittal, the big steel maker, and another one's owned by a company called Metinvest. So because you have all those operating mines around us, the government-owned railway is only 2 kilometers away. High voltage power lines follow that rail. There's 5 ports within 250 to 450 kilometers from the site. And you've got a city of 700,000 people where the bulk of the people work in the mining sector. So you've got all the key ingredients to make a successful, highly economic project.
What city is that? And is it in the east or the west of Ukraine?
It's in the center of the country. It's called Kryvyi.
So Ukraine, I understand, was the breadbasket of the Soviet Union and of sort of Europe, or Eastern Europe at least, and was one of the industrial heartlands. And so mining, steelmaking, industrial activity really was one of the historical key success factors in Ukraine. Is that the case?
Yeah, the area where our project's located is actually where all of the original iron ore mining for the entire Soviet Union occurred, Brian. So these mines that are around us have been operating for well over 70 years and continue to operate today, even though the war's going on.
At this conference, were there other interesting companies that were presenting?
Yeah, there's a number of companies, especially in the high-tech sector, the agricultural sector, which I would suggest Ukraine is very well known for. It has some of the highest quality black earth soil in the world, so it's very, very productive for agriculture. And in the high-tech sector, you've got, again, very intelligent people that would make a fraction of what someone with a similar degree here in Canada would make.
And you've recently, in July, submitted a proposal, a binding investment support agreement to the government of Ukraine, I understand. What's the status of that?
Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting thing. So about a year and a half ago, Ukraine's government passed legislation to try to help attract investments to the country. And this legislation does things like freezing the current tax and royalty rates. It exempts you from import duties on any equipment that you purchase in order to build your in our case, it's a mine, but it could be a manufacturing plant, whatever it is that you need to import. And it also includes land transfer, which is critical for our project to be viable. So we pulled together pretty extensive documentation, over 500 pages, in order to submit our application to the Ministry of Economy. And we did that back in July. But I'd say that the kind of frustrating thing, Brian, is that we've been waiting for over 4 months to get feedback and haven't received that yet. And it's kind of strange when you look at our project. It's a phased build. The first phase, as we discussed, is a little over 500 million. But then there's a second phase, and then there's the ongoing costs. So this is about a 1.2 billion US investment into Ukraine, with a government that's literally traveling the world, knocking on people's doors, trying to attract investment. When we're sitting, right in the country, already had invested quite a bit of money, ready to go. So our expectation is we want the government to be a lot more timely in their feedback.
And you say that you got full support from the president of Ukraine when he visited Canada?
That's correct. So when President Zelensky was first elected, very shortly afterwards, he came to Canada and actually did a speech at the Economic Club of Canada, which was attended by well over 400 people. And he was right beside Chrystia Friedland. And in that speech, he passionately talked about some changes that he wants to make to Ukraine. And in particular, he even mentioned Blackiron's project by name and said this is something that was very personal to him, given that he grew up in the same city that our project is going to be constructed. So for him, it wasn't just about creating new jobs and new taxes. It was something personal to give back to the city where he grew up.
So what's holding it up, do you think?
I couldn't tell you, Brian. I mean, obviously, we're not going to construct a project during the war, because the last thing you want to do is spend $500 million only to have a Russian missile blow it up. And there's also a concern that should the Russian forces move forward, you wouldn't also want it to be taken over by Russians and stolen from you. So that's what holds it up during the time of war. But outside of that, there's still quite a bit of work that we can do during this time of war to advance the project with our permitting, getting this investment support agreement in place. And those are all really important things, so that as soon as there is peace, we can immediately jump right into construction.
Sounds like just a fascinating opportunity. And you're traded on the TSX. If people want to, the TSX Venture, if people want to find out more information about your company, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so people can go to our website, which is quite simply www.blackiron.com. And we are main board TSX listed.
Oh, you're not venture. I apologize.
No, we're on the big board. We used to have quite a bit higher market cap until all this war came down.
That's got to be a challenge for you as the CEO. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Matt Simpson, the CEO of a fascinating company, Blackiron, that's got an iron ore mining project in the middle of Ukraine that is stalled right now, but he suggests is over $1 billion investment opportunity. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with Matt Simpson. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Blackiron Inc. It's a fascinating company that's got a iron ore mine in the center of Ukraine. He's been stalled since the Russian invasion in actually developing it, but sounds like it's ready to go. And you were saying that it's an opportunity to have green iron ore, or there is an opportunity to produce green iron ore. That's interesting. Tell us a little bit about how you produce green iron ore.
Yeah, Brian. So traditionally, most iron that was used to make steel is made what's called hematite, which is just non-magnetic iron ore. And the other big type of iron ore that is produced is called magnetite, which again simply means magnetic iron ore. But when you use magnetic iron ore, you can get to a much higher purity. So non-magnetic iron typically is around 62% purity. And with the magnetic iron, you can actually increase that to about 70%. But equally important is when you heat magnetic iron, it actually has what's called an exothermic oxidation reaction. So in layman's terms, it gives off heat. So when you heat it, it actually releases a tremendous amount of heat. So therefore reduces the amount of energy that's required to convert it from iron ore to steel. And steel contributes roughly to about 7% of global warming. So it's a tremendous contributor. And by using this high purity magnetic iron ore, you can cut those emissions, especially if you use hydrogen as your energy source, by about 90%. So this is a much more sustainable way to produce a material that's used for so many elements in everyday life. Everything from the utensil that you probably just had your last meal with through to whatever mode of transportation that you might be using today. Steel is everywhere.
That's fascinating. So where do you get the hydrogen?
There's many different ways to produce that. Typically, people like to you start with water, basically, and then with the water, you can use green energy. So this would be electricity that's produced with solar, wind, or in our case in Canada, we have a tremendous amount of hydroelectric, so water-produced energy. And using that, you put it through what's called an electrolyzer, and it basically separates the hydrogen from the oxygen. And then that hydrogen can then be used as a tremendously energy-intensive source.
And so this mine in Ukraine is mining this magnetic high proportion magnetic iron ore?
That's correct. So our product that we plan to produce would be between a 68 and a 70% iron, and it would be 100% magnetite. So it's that very high energy emissive iron that you want in order to make green steel. It's actually the only way that you can produce that. So all the iron ore that comes out of Australia, largely today, majority of the iron ore that comes out of Brazil, which are the two biggest suppliers, is largely that non-magnetic hematite. But the whole future, especially in Europe, where countries have carbon taxes, is moving towards this high purity magnetic iron. And
how do you know that it's this high purity magnetic iron ore? Is there surveys? Is there sampling that you do of the mine or of where the mine's going to be that proves out that higher purity content?
Yeah, so there's a lot of metallurgical test work that you need to do to confirm what type of iron you have and how high of a concentration you can bring it to. But the simplest thing is you literally just stick a magnet on the ore, and if the magnet sticks to it, it's magnetic, it's magnetite. If it doesn't stick, then you've likely got hematite. So in our case, that's literally how in part you define the ore body, is you literally run what's called a geomagnetic survey. It's basically just running a big magnet over top of the ground, and it lights up like a Christmas tree. And the brighter the reds and the yellows, the more intense, the stronger the iron content is in the ground.
And there are several other mines right around you, you say. Are they also high purity magnetic, or are they the other type?
They are all the same type of ore as us. However, the way that they're processed doesn't bring about as high a purity product. Most of those mines, as we mentioned earlier, were constructed 60, 70 years ago during the Soviet era, and they didn't care as much then about pollution and greenhouse gases. So they only concentrate their iron to about 62%, which is more common, and it has about 8 or 9% silica. So that material could be refined further, but you need to make substantial additional investment to grind it to a finer consistency. And then you basically buy, they're called low intensity magnetic separators, which are basically big drums with magnets in them to concentrate it.
Are those mines operational today in the middle of a war?
They are. Amazingly, Brian, none of the mines around us have actually stopped during this time. They used to travel to the south and export using what's called Port Eugenie, which is a Cape-size port, so it takes very, very large ocean-going vessels, 200 to 240,000 ton vessels to export the iron ore. But what they're doing today is they're actually railing largely to the west towards Poland, and then they export either through Poland or to other countries in Europe.
And so the steel is actually made not in Ukraine but elsewhere?
Yes, I mean, there is steel making in Ukraine. Our next door neighbor, ArcelorMittal, for example, is fully integrated. So they not only mine the iron ore, but they go through the entire production to actually produce steel. But most of the other steel production largely occurred in the east in the country. And you might recall from some of the news about a year ago that Ground Zero was a steel mill for a long period of time. So that the two biggest steel mills in the country have both been absolutely decimated. So a big initiative right now is if we're going to rebuild Ukraine, let's move towards more modern technology and let's rebuild it in a much more environmentally friendly, more sustainable manner through use of this high purity iron ore.
And so your proposal is not to include steel, it's just the iron ore mine. Is that correct?
That is correct. Our plan initially is to produce what's called pellet feed. So it's like a very fine sand, if you will. And that very fine sand would be purchased by a steel mill that would then create a pellet, just like a marble. And they'd use that marble to then melt it down and produce the steel.
And you've been talking to customers already or not yet?
Yeah, just before the war, we were about to sign an offtake agreement with Cargill. So Cargill was looking to purchase 100% of the product that we would be able to make. And it was a really attractive deal, Brian, because we're going to get 100% of the 65% iron price, which is a price that you can easily find on a Bloomberg terminal, or it's quoted by people that are knowledgeable in the industry. And then we would share the incremental price that Cargill would achieve by selling the extra 3 to 5% iron. So in exchange for that, they're going to invest $75 million into black iron, US.
And where would Cargill have shipped the iron ore to and made the steel?
Most likely it would go to a Middle East producer. In the Middle East, they have very low cost natural gas. So there's quite a few of these what's called electric arc furnace or direct reduction production facilities in the Middle East to make the high purity, low emission steel. You're seeing a little bit more of it now coming into Europe, but predominantly right now it's the Middle East.
And then the steel would get shipped to end users?
That's correct. It'd go to any end user, but the best market is largely in Europe, again, because of carbon taxes. So in Europe, they do actually pay a premium for green steel because you end up ultimately spending less money than buying regular steel with a carbon tax on top.
Fascinating industry. And so getting going is going to take what? It's going to take the end of the Russian-Ukraine war?
Yeah, again, during this time, we can put that investment support agreement in place, which is critical to lock down our tax rates, lock down that land transfer. We can also progress some of our in-country permitting on the project, but in order to actually start construction, realistically, we do need to have peace.
And construction will take how long?
It'll take just under 2 years to complete the construction. And then once you're up and running, initially making 4 million tons a year for about $33 a ton. Today, iron ore is selling for $130 for 62%, and you're getting about $4 to $5 per 1% higher. So let's say we're making a 68% iron. You would today sell that product for somewhere around $155 and make it for 30. And we're making 4 million tons. So if you do the math, we'd be generating just shy of 500 million a year in profit.
In profit?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like a good investment, but you got to bet on peace.
You do. I mean, that's the key. I mean, this war can't go on forever. And once it does stop, this is going to be the biggest rebuilding project we'll probably ever see in our lifetime. And again, any sort of big rebuilding, whether you're going to build a high rise, you want to build a bridge, you're going to need steel.
Sounds like, frankly, the steel mills and some of the users should all be in Ukraine as well.
Yeah, there is, I think, quite a bit of interest from different steel production companies and some of the bigger mining companies to also look at production once there's peace in the country.
I think that's going to be a really interesting topic. Hopefully, after the obviously how we win the war topic is solved, but how do we rebuild the country? Let's take a break for some messages and turn to that, because that seems like it was one of the topics at this recent conference that you held or that you helped sponsor in Toronto. Stay with us, everyone. Back in just 2 minutes, talking to Matt Simpson, the CEO of a company that is building an iron ore mine in the middle of in the middle of Ukraine. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm having an interesting conversation tonight with Matt Simpson. He's the Chief Executive Officer at a company by the name of Black Iron Inc. It trades on the Toronto Stock Exchange. He's raised a significant amount of money and potential commitments of money to open an iron ore mine in the middle of central Ukraine. He's stalled right now because of the war. But he's got to be one of those experts on what we can do, what needs to be done to rebuild Ukraine. You've recently, I understand, sponsored this conference about rebuilding Ukraine in Toronto. Were there numerous companies in attendance at this conference? And tell me, if you could, a little bit of the flavor of the conversation and your presentations on exactly how you're going to rebuild. You think the West is going to be rebuilt, and how Ukraine is going to rebuild Ukraine.
So there was several thousands of people that attended this conference. It was, I think, really good turnout, strong interest from a variety of different sectors, everything from agriculture to green electricity. High tech was definitely thematic. And then you had more traditional natural resources, oil and gas, and mining interests. In terms of rebuilding Ukraine, I think it's going to be absolutely essential that there's a few front runners that show they're able to develop successfully in the country. And by doing that, you're then going to attract other further investors.
So, after World War II, we had a Marshall Plan for rebuilding of Germany. Is there any chance that we could have that? Is that the right answer?
Yeah, look, I do think that's part of it, Brian. I mean, there's a number of different government organizations that are currently putting money into Ukraine, like the World Bank, like the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. But in order to get a lot of private sector money in there does need to be a coordinated effort. And part of that effort does need to be on Ukraine's government side, where they need to cut some of the red tape and bureaucracy that's there. I'll use a simple example for you. When you want to finance a mining project, you generally have to do your environmental and social impact assessment according to what's called the Equator Principles. And those are principles developed by the World Bank to make sure that everything's been done in a very thorough manner. And international lenders require your project to be in compliance with those standards. But in Ukraine, they make you do your environmental impact assessment according to local regulations. So it's kind of mind-boggling on, if the World Bank has these standards and you're compliant with it, why isn't that good enough for Ukraine? And that duplication of effort takes time and costs money. So coming back to your idea of Marshall Plan, I think it does make sense that, especially during the initial rebuilding period, that Ukraine adopts international recognized standards for engineering, for economic studies, for environmental and social work, and really focuses on ensuring that the work that's being done in country is actually more towards managing construction and ensuring that things are being built to code, as opposed to worrying about whether documentation on paper is to their liking.
One of the issues that people have talked about in the past, I think before the war, was corruption in Ukraine. Has that been solved, or is that an issue still to be addressed in the future?
It's still an issue, Brian. I mean, it's a country where people are quite poor but quite intelligent. And unfortunately, there is this history all the way down to the local government inspector, through to even senior people within the president's administration that have dealt in graft. And you're even seeing it, sadly, during this war. I think President Zelensky is working really hard. They put an independent court in place to start cracking down on this. And it's going to be essential as part of the rebuilding of the country that they bring that under control. Because the only way that international investors are going to be comfortable putting their money into the country is if they believe that they can work to ethical standards that would be normal in most other civilized countries.
I spent some time in Kyiv about 10 years ago. I was warned. I was looking in the pharmaceutical business at the time, and I was warned that numerous different people would come looking for payoffs. The health inspector, the fire inspector, et cetera, and that you had to make sure that you didn't get involved, because once you started getting involved in that, it would never end. Is that still an issue?
That was more of an issue 10 years ago. I mean, 10 years ago when you were there, and I was there then also, very much you had these oligarchs, ultra wealthy individuals that would have proxies. So they'd have people that were appointed to different senior positions within government. And business and government, to an extent, were very intertwined at that point in time. And if you didn't find a local partner, good luck. It was an extremely difficult place to navigate, especially as a Canadian company that needs to be following our laws and regulations, which do not allow you to do business in that manner. But things have changed quite a bit over the past, I'd say, 6 to 7 years, ever since Russia initially came into the eastern part of Ukraine, where you're now seeing a lot of the oligarchs being stripped of their power. And actually, very recently, President Zelensky even passed a law to define what an oligarch means. And I don't remember the exact criteria, but it included things like having a wealth over 75 million. Do you have a monopoly in a particular business? And are you a member of parliament? And it was amazing at that point in time, Brian, because a lot of these oligarchs all of a sudden started to sell their media businesses. They dropped their positions within government, and things started to turn around and become.
When I was there, a lot of the capital came from Russian banks, which I presume have all left the country. Did the financial sector need to be sort of rebuilt, recreated?
There's also a lot of change going on in that regard too, Brian. I wouldn't say the financial sector is really the area that I would focus on. If I was looking at how to attract foreign investment to the country, I think it's going to be, number one, important to be a lot more responsive to foreign investors. And then again, to help cut through a lot of the bureaucracy that's simply not necessary. It's duplication.
Fascinating conversation and a really interesting investment opportunity. Remind us the name of your company and where you trade and what website we can go to if we want to check you out from an investment standpoint.
So we are Black Iron Inc. We trade on the main board of the Toronto Stock Exchange. The ticker is BKI, and people can find out more information by going to our website, which is simply blackiron.com.
Matt Simpson, please come back and let us know how this mine and your investment in Ukraine progresses.
Thank you for having me on, Brian.
We're going to take a break and come back with another investment in Ukraine in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everyone. Fascinating opportunities. It's too bad that this war has happened. Obviously, it's terrible, but it does create some interesting investment opportunities. Stay with us, everybody.